So we're looking at the Florida Building Code existing building. Sometimes I don't even feel like it's worth spending a lot of time on this at all because I haven't seen a question out of this book personally, but you never know. It's one of the books you got to bring in. You might get a question out of it. So let's go ahead and just, delve into it just a little bit. Now, as far as chapter one is concerned, which is administration, all that, permitting, inspections, and that kind of thing, it's all going to be covered in the Florida Building Code building administration. What's got to be on your plans, your inspections and all that type of stuff. So don't even worry about this book when it comes to that. And there's a few definitions where they talk about what a repair is. This is section 202. This is chapter 2. And then they tell you what they're talking about when they're talking about the work area. There's always a possibility you might get something like that. Chapter 3, these are your compliance methods for bringing this building that that's existing, that you're renovating, into compliance. Okay, so there's 3 methods that they talk about here. This could be a question. So your prescriptive method, your work area method, and your performance compliance method. The prescriptive method, it talks mostly about fire prevention code. Your work area, it depends on how much work you're doing, what percentage of work and how much work you're doing. We'll talk about that in a minute. And your performance means just they look at the whole building and see, what is the performance of the building. Okay, so you've got those 3 methods there, and we'll refer back to those in a moment. Okay, so a repair, if you're going to do a repair, okay, for repairs in historic buildings, replacement or partial placement of existing missing features match the original height, size, and original method can be permitted. So maybe, something wouldn't, be up to code as far as the size of some decorative thing. But if it was, if it was a historic building, they'd let you get away with it. Okay. They also talk about if you're doing a repair, you can use these 10-year non-removable, non-replaceable batteries in lieu of retrofitting those smoke alarms to attach to the electrical system. Okay, so that was section 402.3 and 403.2 under repairs. Not a big deal. Okay. And then you were going to go to remember, we talked about, in chapter 3, we talked about the prescriptive compliance method. That was here, the prescriptive. And it's mainly talking about if you're adding automatic sprinklers and that kind of thing. And as we go through, so that's really what they're focused on with the prescriptive method. And that's really what you got to know for the exam. Okay. All right. So classification of work. Remember, we looked at chapter 3. It said work area compliance. If you're doing the work area compliance method, you've got to follow the requirements of 6 through 13. Well, that's what they're talking about here. This is our classification of work method. Now you have a level 1, a level 2, and a level 3. You have level 1, you're basically just changing the covering of something. Level 2, you're maybe eliminating or adding or changing a door or a window. And then level 3, it's 50% of the work area. That would be, if I was writing an exam, that would be, a pretty obvious test question right there. Okay, then chapter 7 talks all about your level 1. Remember, you're just covering stuff. All right, and you've got the provision about the smoke alarms, and you've got the provision about this re-roofing. Some of those old roofs are really flat roofs, which you really can't do anymore, but you don't have to redo the roof just because you're doing, some covering up of some things in there. So you don't have to do or if you're doing the re-roofing, you don't actually have to add slope to it if it's a level 1. Okay. And then you get into a level 2. Remember, you're replacing a door or a window in a level 2. You're replacing some type of a component. And one of the things that I thought was interesting was this 804.2.1, where you're talking in a high-rise building If it's a load greater than 30, you have to put an automatic sprinkler system. Okay, if it's a work area, have exits or quarters shared by more than one tenant, or to have exits or quarters serving an occupant load greater than 30, you have to provide automatic sprinkler protection. That's paragraph 804.2.1. Now, on the means of egress, all right, so there is some requirements for your means of egress if you're doing, if you're changing out a door or window. So you might want to take a look at those just in case you get that. And also the accessibility. You've got to comply with the Florida Building. Any of those elements that you change has to comply with the Florida Building Code accessibility. That's paragraph 806.1. Now you go to this alterations level 3. Okay, remember this is that work area method. Level 3 was you're repairing or replacing more than 50% of the work area, okay, of the building. And they talk about means of egress, and you've got to follow those requirements back in the previous chapter on those means of egress, and the Florida Building Code accessibility. All right, change of occupancy. If you're going to change the occupancy of a building, you've got all these things that you have to do here. Electrical, plumbing, mechanical, and so forth. So if they do talk about change of occupancy, you're doing a repair, you're going to change occupancy, you can come here and see what you might find. Additions. Okay, so we're going to do an addition. One of the things I found that you've got to 1102.2, you've got to keep that fire separation according to Florida Building Code building. Okay, so make sure that you're doing that. I would say that would be the most important thing there. In a historic building, you've got to bring everything up to code, except it does say there's some exceptions here. If you're on the National Register of Historic Places or a contributing resource within a National Register of Historic Places, then you might be exempt from that. So it might be some exceptions. So that's an interesting little footnote that might come up. Like I said, you're not really going to get a lot out of this manual. Maybe nothing. No questions. Relocated or moved buildings. Okay, lots of provisions here you might want to take a look at. And then remember back in chapter 3, okay, everything we've been talking about, chapter 6 through 13, was this work area method. I'm going to flip back for a minute. That was that work area method. Now we're talking about the performance compliance method, and basically they're looking at the whole building. They're looking at everything, and you've got, they've got all these charts and tables and everything else, fire detection values, corridor wall values. They everything goes into, every component goes into this, this compliance chart, and to see if it's performing like it's supposed to. I don't think you're going to really need to work on that. You do have chapter 15, safeguards during construction. Now, most of this stuff is in Florida Building Code building. So, that's where you're going to go for that kind of stuff. Safeguards during construction. Remember, that's chapter 33, I believe. Now, you've got to notify the person 10 days prior to the scheduled start date of the excavation if you're going to affect somebody else's property. You got to stay 20 feet away from an intersection for all your materials. That's 1503.2. The other one was 1502.1. Means of egress. All right. Now, this was interesting. I don't remember seeing this before. 1505.1, where a building has been constructed to a building height of 50 feet or 4 stories, or where an existing building exceeding 50 feet in height is altered, at least one temporary lighted stairway shall be provided, unless one or more of the permanent stairways are erected as the construction progresses. So that's kind of interesting. Safeguards during construction. And then you have your reference standard, and so forth. Nothing else in this book that I think is going to be critical, except for the index, of course. The index is going to help you get where you need to go. This is only if you get a question about, remodeling, retrofitting, working on an existing building. So that's what it is, Florida Building Code existing building. Okay, hey, thanks for listening to this. My name's Jack Sheffield, Jack the Exam Guy. Don't ever let anybody tell you don't know Jack, because you do. And I'm going to help you pass this exam, and I'm proud to do it, and I appreciate your business.